This next video will demonstrate how to uh, obtain the item characteristic curves produced by IRTPro. And again, we're going to use the time on task items from the Student Evaluation of Online Teaching Effectiveness. In the last video, we ran the analysis and we were able to get our parameter estimates. So we were provided with our slope and thresholds for each item, and these are the parameter estimates that allow us to calculate the log likelihood for each of the items of moving from one response category, such as strongly disagree, to disagree. And then we have the item information function. So this tells us how it's really a measure of the preciseness of our items in measuring people at the different response categories. So if we go to analysis and we go to graphs, we see category characteristic curves for each item. And so let's just take item 2. If I click on this, you can see that what IRTPro does is it's taken the 1 through 6 scale and it's converted it to a 0 through 5 scale. So my original scale was 1 equals strongly disagree through 6 equals strongly agree. Well, now we have 0 being representing strongly disagree through 5 representing strongly agree. So if we look at where the first curve crosses the second curve, so this is the curve for strongly disagree. This is the curve for disagree. And we can see that the threshold value is at about negative 2.3 or 4. Now we can verify that. We can go back to our output and we can go up to these threshold values and we see that in fact it is negative 2.4. So let's look at the next threshold. It should be at about 2, negative 2. So if we look at where the next category, 2 crosses 3, or I'm sorry, 1 crosses 2, so this would be disagree, and this would be mildly disagree. We can see that the threshold value is right here at negative 2, and that's verified by the table. And then if we look at where mildly disagree crosses the category of mildly agree, that's going to be at about negative 1.6. And we can verify that right here, negative 1.64. So you can see that these tabled threshold values are nicely represented by the category characteristic curves. For example, where mildly agree and agree, where those categories intersect, that's at about -1. And then where agree and strongly agree, that threshold is at about 0.4. And if we look back at the table, we can see, yeah, 0.38. So it's not as precise, obviously, as the tables, but it certainly provides a nice visual graphic to understand those results. Now, we can look at the item information. And so if we, let's just take item 2 again. And I think if I, if I click on group, I can see the item information functions or curve for each item. And let's look at item 2 again. And for item 2, we can see that we have good information, more precise measurement at these lower ability levels. In other words, these lower levels of agreement than at the upper levels of agreement. And this is verified by our table. So if we look at our item information functions for the table, we can see that as our ability increases, and what I mean by ability in this case is our level of agreement increases, we can see that our information decreases. And that seems to be the case for each one of the items. If you can see that pattern. So these items are doing a pretty good job of assessing lower levels of agreement as compared to upper levels of agreement. And so we can look at these by a group, and I think it would also look at the combined. So this gives us not only a picture or graphs that represent the category characteristic curves for each of the responses for each item, but it also superimposes the item information function or curve on each one of those items. And that's the combined, but then we could look at it and then it shows us them together. So we have a lot of options here. We can look at them separately or we can look at them together. So then we can look at the total information curve. And so this is the total information provided by all 6 items. And again, as I said, the characteristic of these 6 items is it does a pretty good job of assessing lower levels of agreement. But when we get to the upper levels, the higher levels of agreement, we see that our information tails off. And notice that this dotted line, the standard error, is smaller for these lower levels of agreement response categories because our information is larger, and so we have more precise measurement. Whereas at these higher levels of agreement, our standard error is higher, our information is lower, so we have less precise measurement. And then for our test characteristic curve, what this curve provides is a way to calculate an expected score based on someone's theta or ability. In this case, it's how well they agree with all 6 statements that make up the time on task factor. So somebody that has a low level of agreement across those items, if we go up to where the these points intersect the line, we could see that we would expect their total test score to be 14 or about 14. And notice that again the scale runs from 0 to 30 because again IRTPro assigned 0 to strongly agree or strongly disagree, I'm sorry, and 5 to strongly agree. So we had 5 categories, and if everybody agreed, so 6 items times 5 would be a possible highest score of 30, versus if somebody didn't agree with any of the statements, they strongly disagreed, then they would have a 0. So again, if we would go here and look at somebody who has a high level of agreement, so they have a high theta value, and we go up to the line, we could see that they would almost, they probably have about a score of 29 or close to 30. And so we can also remove items and see how that affects our estimate of expected score. And so there's many things that these IRTPro graphs provide for us, and in particular they are very helpful in helping us to visualize the parameter estimates and the other results that are provided in the IRTPro output.